folks, how you doing? It's Mitch from YouTube, Hard Intentions, our YouTube channel. And right off the bat, I want to thank our Patreon donators. We have B Bear, Jason and Jacobson, and Dan Mack. I want to thank you all very much for donating through the Patreon program. I just means a lot to my wife and I, and we want to thank you for that. I also want to tell you folks, got my hat crooked there. We have an interview coming up that some people might not like. They might not. We're going to get a view from the other side of the aisle, folks. From a guy that worked at DVI when I was there for many years. He did his whole career there. I knew him for about 5 years. He's a prison guard and he's retired. He's been retired for about 13 years. And he reached out to me as soon as I paroled through Facebook, congratulated me for getting out, and he's been in touch with me and several other guys that did live terms there at DVI. And I just thought it'd be interesting to get a view from the other side of the aisle. So I interviewed him. It's pretty long, so the wife's going to edit it and break it up into a couple of different sections for you guys to view. And it'll give you an idea of what things were like for the other side of the aisle, So that's what's coming up, Some people said, hey, your viewers might not like it. They might. Who knows? When you live in prison, there's two sides of the aisle, and you interact with people on the other side on a daily basis. Your wing officer, the guys that are working at your job location, the yard, the visiting room, everywhere you go, there's cops, and you got to deal with them on a daily basis. And when you spend, 5-10 years in a certain prison, you get to know them. And this guy bought artwork for me through the hobby program, and like I said, he always treated us with respect, and he never crossed the line, never asked us to do anything stupid. He was a pretty decent guy, as far as that goes. So, I interviewed him today. I just want to let you know what's coming up. So, I hope you enjoy the interview. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. So, I also want to say that we have hardintentions.com, our website, where we sell T-shirts. That's our logo that's in the front of our T-shirts. And this is our latest shirt, the Hammer Drop. It's on our website. And this is a T-shirt, but we also have some hoodies coming out. They're prepaid orders, and Tuesday, the 10th of March, will be the last day to prepay for a hoodie. So get your orders in, folks. Then we're going to run right over the printer on the 11th and get them printed, and then get them out to the people that ordered them as soon as possible. Spent a little time outside. Got a little red today. Walking the dogs. Took Chewy for a walk up and down downtown. So anyway, folks, I hope you enjoy our video, our interview, and I hope you gain a little insight on prison. And like I said, it gives you a little idea what the other side of the aisle is like, how they see things, and how some of them really are. It's easy to say, F the cops, but they're human beings like us. A lot of guys don't want to admit that. And like this guy says towards the end of the video, he doesn't consider himself a cop. He's considered himself a prison guard. So, and hey, look, view the video and make your own judgment on it. How you see it. Thank you very much, folks. And I have some other interviews slated for the future. I hope they pan out. Hopefully some folks from Ireland, give you some insight on what's going on over there. Take care. Thank you all for watching very much. Have a good evening or day or morning, whichever one it is. We sell merchandise, T-shirts, and all that stuff. And today I have another interview. It's been a while since I've done an interview, and so I knew this man in prison when I was in prison at DVI, the prison in Tracy, California. And so I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself. Here you go. Introduce yourself to the people here, please. And
my name is John. Yeah, I was a prison guard there at Tracy when Mitch was there, and kind of a unique story how Mitch and I first met. And if you don't mind me telling the story, that's kind of funny. I laugh about it to this day. When I was working in culinary, I was working the steam line, and what we used to do is when you work the steam line, people, that's where they came through to get their trays. And when we finished up with feeding a meal, whatever food was left over, then the workers got to have that. That was kind of like their reward for being the steam line workers. Well, on this particular day, one of my workers, it might have been eggs or something like that, like on a Sunday, and the guy, yeah, the Grand Slammer, and so anyway, the guy he grabbed up some eggs and gave them to Mitch before we were finished with the steam line, which you're not really supposed to do. But I couldn't leave the steam line at the moment because I still had to monitor the steam line. So when we got done feeding, I went out to Mitch, and I had never met him before. And when I walked up to him, I asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Smiley." And if you know anything about prison life, you know, everybody has a nickname. And so I figured it was his nickname. So when I said, "No, what's your real name?" And he says, "It is my real name." And I was like, "No way, man. Let me see your ID card." So he hands me his ID card, and I looked at it, and I just kind of started laughing. And I said, "Well, hey, man, these eggs are on me." And he just said, "Right on." And then we were cool ever since.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was I think it was eggs and sausage too. It was like a Grand Slam Sunday breakfast, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So yeah, it was back in '89.
Something like that. Yeah.
Early '89. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that guy that was Star. He's struck out doing 3 strikes. He's been
No,
in
right on.
prison. Yeah. So that was a long time ago, and so you know, you obviously now folks know, you know, you were a prison guard there at Tracy for a while, and I think you finished your career there. So I'd like to start off, like, you know, give us a little bit about your background, if you'd like, you know, like where you grew up, what kind of home life you had, maybe, if you'd like, you know, up
Sure.
to, you know, your teenage years, maybe.
Sure. So I grew up in Tracy. So I grew up near the prison. And when I was growing up here, the town was fairly small. It only had about 15,000 people. Now it's pushing 100,000 people. It's basically becoming just another piece of the East Bay area. And so if you were, I don't know the words, active, you know, if you had a lot of energy, you were popular with the local police. And so at a young age, I was popular with the local police. Never committed any felonies, but I caught a couple little misdemeanors. Most of my stuff was traffic related. You know, I had a heavy foot. I had a motorcycle. I was either doing wheelies down the street, or I was, you know, going sideways around corners. And it was like, I just seemed like I was that guy. I couldn't leave the house without getting a ticket. So I was in traffic court quite a bit as a juvenile. And then when I turned 18, I had my license had gotten pulled for exhibition of speed or reckless driving or something. Bear in mind, never had an accident, never had a DUI, but I definitely had a heavy foot. So anyway, the local judge, you know, he says, "Well, you know what, you need to learn a little lesson. And so I'm going to let you go do some weekends at the county." And, you know, it's funny, and you can kind of relate. When I was 18, you know, I thought I knew it all and realized now I didn't know squat. But, you know, so I go over to the county jail, and, you know, and I do my little weekend gigs there. And, but I still drive because I still got the keys to the car and I don't really care. So I get busted again. And then I go end up back in court. Bear in mind, I'm 18 now. I'm right out of high school. And the judge says, he goes, "Well, man, you know, you're not really learning your lesson." And I'm thinking, well, you know what, you're going to give me a couple more weekends? And the dude gives me 6 months. And I'm like, 6 months in the county? I'm like, man, I'm 18 years old. Man, you send me to the county for 6 months, you're really not going to like me when I get out, you know? Yeah. So it's going to change my whole attitude. So back in those days, this was back in 1976. So back then they had this thing because we weren't, going to war with anybody then. They had a thing where you could join the military, as kind of as versus going to jail. So
Yeah.
I asked the judge, well,
So
what
that's
if
right after Vietnam.
right at the end? Yep, January 76. In fact, when I went in January, it was still considered Vietnam era for your GI Bill. But
Right.
in 76 is when we pulled out completely out of Vietnam.
All right.
So anyway, I asked him if I could do that, and he says, I'll postpone your sentencing for 2 weeks. You either come back in 2 weeks with some enlistment papers or come back with your jail clothes. And I'm like, all right. So I hustled my butt over, and in Stockton was where the recruiters were, and only one that could really hook me up that short was the Air Force.
Right.
So they said, all right. So I said, I'll go. So, and I came back 2 weeks later with my enlistment papers. He says, all right, go away, get out of my hair for a while.
Yeah.
So I go into the Air Force. I go through boot camp. I go to my school and everything, and what happened is I only ended up doing like a year. But 6 months while I was at my tech base, 6 months in, I get this legal letter from San Joaquin County, and I'm thinking, oh man, what are they going to tell me now? And I open it up, and it's credit for time served. So I got a credit for time served in the military.
That's
So
cool.
anyway, yeah. So then a few months later, I finished my tech school. Well, what happened is they overbooked my class. I was actually going into electronics, and it was a class that they figured that 20% would fail, so they overbooked the class. Well,
All right.
we all passed. So then when they passed, they told us, well, 2 of you are not going to be going to your base. You're going to do something else. And I was like, well, what? And they said, well, MPs or food service. And I'm like, nah, man, I didn't come in here to learn all this electronic stuff to, sling hash or go guard airplanes.
Right.
And they said, well, you can go home and get your full GI Bill and go to college or whatever you want, honorable discharge. And I was like, man, I got my credit for time served. I've only been in for a year, and I get to go home and put this schooling that I got to work. So at that time, what's known as the Silicon Valley over here, Santa Clara, I was just jumping off. So I go over there and I apply for a couple of jobs as an electronic technician because I know how to work on these circuit boards now.
Right.
So I go over there, and if they're paying like $6 an hour, of course, this is back in 76, right? 77. So I go over there, and they're like $6 an hour. Well, a friend of mine had semi trucks, a friend of the family. And I always liked trucks. I always liked anything with an engine in it. I don't care a motorcycle, go-kart, car. I didn't care. Trucks, and a semi truck was just like the biggest thing with an engine. Anything with an engine. So I end up talking to this guy about getting my class A license, class 1. And so I get my class 1, and I go to work for this dude, and then I drive truck for like the next 5 years. Well, then one day I'm talking to a buddy of mine that I grew up with that had gone in the Marine Corps and got out and went to work at Tracy, went to work at DVI. And we were talking, and he says, hey, he goes, you ought to put in for a job out here. And I'm like, nah, man, I'm kind of like you, my interaction with anybody with a badge was usually never good.
Yeah.
So it's like, and you want me to go to work at a prison? And I'm like, nah, man, I don't think it's for me. And what he told me, and I thank him to this day, he says, if I could do it, I know you could do it. He goes, you have the personality for it.
Right.
And I'm like, well, all right. So I put in the application. And back in those days, there was only like 11 prisons. Now there's 536, something like that.
Yeah.
And you actually went to that prison, knocked on the door, and said, hey, I'd like a job. Now
Really?
it's all statewide. You send it off to Sacramento and you interview in Sac. I mean, it's all done statewide. But back then,
so that was before they had big, strong union and stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, the union was around, but it wasn't as strong as it got eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could just go right to the prison and apply for a job?
That's what I did.
Wow.
Yeah, so I went over there and I took my interview there, my physical there, everything there, and I ended up going to the academy.
Yeah.
And I remember, and it's kind of funny, I was 26 years old. And I remember after the academy, my first day, I'm driving down the entrance building there at Tracy. And just to give people a mental picture, as you're coming in the entrance road at Tracy, there's a tower and the fence line, and then there's just this line of cell blocks. You
Right.
know, you have like East Hall, West Hall, and then you had F wing, E wing, D wing, C wing, all the way down.
Right.
And as I'm driving in, and you see the double rows of fence with the barbed wire on the top,
Right.
and as I'm driving in, I'm looking over, and I'm thinking, man, do I really want to do this? I mean, I've already been through
Yeah.
the academy and everything. And my very first day of work, I'm thinking, man, do I want to do this? And I thought, well, I don't know if I want to drive truck all my life, so I got to at least give it a shot. And
Right.
I did, and it just clicked. It just clicked. It's just trip. You think everybody has a talent for something or a skill for something or whatever. And let's face it, not everybody can do time that has to do time.
Right.
And I know that everybody that has a badge shouldn't have a badge.
Yeah.
It's just that way.
So, like when you started working there, you had other people you grew up around, friends and all that kind of stuff that weren't connected to this prison job, right?
Right.
So how did you let them know, hey, I'm working at the prison, and if so, like how did they, what was their reaction to that?
They didn't really trip because the friends I had before, were still my friends, because again, prison guard is different than a street cop. You
Right.
become a street cop, now you're the guy that might arrest me.
Right.
You're a prison guard, you're just the guy going to work, I mean, you're going to
Right.
prison and doing your job. In other words,
Right.
I wasn't a threat to anybody
Right.
I knew on the street. I was a guy
Right.
that went inside a controlled environment and came home
Right.
every day.
Hey, so let me ask you, like, when you go to the academy, like, a lot of guys think, well, they train these guys to have a certain outlook towards inmates, and like they train these guys to say, oh, they train them in the academy, think we're all pieces of shit, and to treat us like shit and all that. I'm just kind of curious. I mean, did you get some of that in the academy, or was it just like rules, teaching you the rule? I mean, I'm just curious, like, what kind of mentality did you come out of the academy with? Did they anything they tried to educate you or indoctrinate you, or was it like, hey, these guys will get over on you, or anything beneficial or negative about coming out of the academy and starting work there? Or
Well,
were you prepared?
it was a 6-week academy, and there's a few things they do. Okay, it's like boot camp. They get you physically fit. You're out running the track every day, doing your push-ups, sit-ups, and all that.
Yeah.
They're also training you in self-defense on
Right.
how to handle hand-to-hand situations. Like whether it's one-on-one or 5-on-1. If you're one-on-one, you trying to get the guy and get his hands behind his back or whatever, control the situation. If it's 5-on-1, okay, are you gonna, you're gonna grab a leg, you're gonna grab an arm, you're gonna whatever. So it's basically how to handle, hand-to-hand situations.
All right.
As far as and then just educate, on the history on prison and what to expect and what not
Right.
to expect. But as far as like saying, all these guys are all pieces of shit and stuff like that, no. But they that they're felons. They've done something bad.
Right.
In fact, I had a guy one time, and I tell this story. He was, I don't know if he had caught in a murder beef or whatever, but we were talking one time, and he was trying to downplay this guy that was in for like burglary or something like that. And he says, yeah, this dude ain't shit, he's a burglar. And I said, well, make no mistake, man. I said, if any one of you guys committed your crime against me, I wouldn't like you very much.
Yeah.
Whether you're breaking into my house trying to steal my stuff, or whether you're trying to take the wind out of my sails. Bottom line is, a felony is a felony. And
Right.
so, but my thing was, I never cared why anybody was in there. If somebody
Right.
told me they were in there for a murder, okay. If they told me they were in there because they were just a habitual burglar,
Yeah, or dope fiend or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
Car thief. It didn't really matter to me. My thing was like, I got to be here for 8 hours. We got to be around each other for 8 hours. We got an objective, what we got to do, whether I'm working in the kitchen or whether I'm working on the yard or
Right.
whether I'm working in one of the units. And it's just like, what do we need to do to get everything done? And,
Yeah, to get through the day, right?
yeah, just get through the day, man.
Yeah.
you know, there were guys that lived to work there, and I couldn't wait for, you know, my shift to end. You know, there were
Right.
guys.
Well,
There were,
I can attest to the fact that, you know, you always treated me with respect, and I never saw you, you know, disrespect people outright for no reason. I never saw that from you. So I can say that that's so like when you first started working there, like your first weeks or months, you know, where did you did they buddy you up with another CO, or where did you start working at? Like the yard, buildings, or you float around, or how did that work out?
so when I first started, you're on probation for a while.
Yeah.
And when I first started, I was working an RDO, or a regular day off position. And basically what I did is I worked a couple days in one housing unit, a couple days in another housing unit. And I worked, I think it was 2 days in H wing and 3 days in G wing.
All
And
right.
basically, you know, you filled in behind the other guy when it was his days off. And yeah, I just remember, you know, some of the stuff. I remember distinctly the first time that I had somebody, when I, you know, you don't know, you're waiting to be ducked, right? You know, that fresh fish, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
You know, and the fellas, you know, those that can get over on you are going to get over on you, because, you know, that's the objective, right? I mean, you
Right.
know, you're there to get away with what you can get away with, you know, not
Right.
necessarily have to hurt anybody, but if I can get away with this, I'm going to get away with it. So
Right.
I just remember one time when I was working in a housing unit, and I had just started, and one of the fellows came up to me and he says, "Hey, I forgot my books in education. I need to go back to education." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I didn't know any better, right? I mean, I'm, you know, giving him the benefit of the doubt. So I write him a pass, you know, and about 15 minutes later, I get a call from somebody in another housing unit. "Hey, man, what's your inmate doing over in here?" You know? And I'm like,
Yeah.
"What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "You gave him a pass." And I said, "Well, I gave him a pass to education." And he says,
Yeah.
"Well, no, he's over here running around our housing unit, you know, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that." And, uh, and I go, "Oh, really?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "As far as," he goes, "They don't tell you they need a pass. Education will call you and say, 'Send this dude down here. He needs to
Right.
come get his books.'" So that was my little eye opener, my first quack, right? And
Yeah.
so then I thought, wow, man, I've never had people challenge me mentally like that. You know, I
Right.
was into physical challenge, but I never had people that were trying to beat me mentally. And
Right.
I and I
Right.
and I was drawn to it, Mitch. Just, you know, like you when you came into the system, you know, they're going to try to get over on you from the gate
Yeah.
until you get smart enough, you know, and then you're hip to the game.
Well, you know, like for an inmate, I can go up to another inmate and go, "Hey, punk," you know, whatever, and you know, I can get if I have to go that route, it's
Right.
easy. And there's no consequence other than if I get caught, I'm gonna get a 115, go to the hole. But for an
Yeah.
inmate or prisoner, you know, to approach to staff like that, we can't do that to staff. So guys
Yeah.
develop little games they play, you know, to get over on staff, and some of them are legit and some of them aren't. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I can understand it's a that's what you mean. Basically, it's a mental. People don't understand. It's a mental challenge for
Yeah.
both sides, because inmates are trying to get over at all costs, whether it's food or illegal activity or weapons or whatever. Things move throughout the prison on a daily basis, all over the prison. And if I want, like, if I want eggs, you know, or if I want to get some steak out of the kitchen into the housing unit, I mean, it's a mental challenge to make it happen, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's
you went to, what year did you start working at Tracy?
84.
Oh, 84. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So uh the northern prison gang had been taken off that yard then prior to you getting there.
Yeah, pretty much. And that was the trip. Tracy, what a lot of people don't know, you know, as you know, the prisons are divided northern and southern. It used to be like south of Bakersfield and north of Bakersfield, you know,
Right.
northern facility versus the southern. Well, the northerns had gotten such a stronghold on Tracy
Right.
that they shipped them all out and turned it into a southern line. And when
Right.
I got there, it was a southern line, and it was the only prison in the state that was a northern prison that had a southern main line.
Well, you know, at that time, all the prisons were in Northern California. Basically, well, they had the four main prisons with Soledad, Tracy, and Quentin and Folsom. They were
Yeah.
all in Northern California, basically. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like now where they got them all over the state, you know.
Yeah, you had Tehachapi, you had Chino.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there was much more, but it was just kind of a trip that they took a pin that was literally, I mean, it was a northern line,
Right.
and they became so strong, you know, that they literally ran the prison. You know,
Right.
they ran everybody.
Right.
And I mean, that's how strong they had become. And then, you know,
They did get removed, and they didn't get removed off the main line by the staff. I mean, they got removed off the main line by some. Actually, that they had a run-in with some white guys that were motorcycle outlaws, and
yeah,
I don't know if you heard the story about that. You know, with baseball bats and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
You know, I don't know what the staff's take on that was, but you got there a few years after that. So did you hear about that incident?
A little bit, but I
Yeah.
don't remember all the details.
So after that incident, the staff locked them all up.
Right.
The gang members from the northern Hispanic gang members, and then they transferred them out. And
Yeah.
and I got to Tracy right when they started letting northern Mexicans come back into that prison. But I heard some pretty treacherous stories, and you would have been there for those. That guys said, you know, they would bring in a few northerners, and it was just a pretty ugly situation for them.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, there was primarily like the blacks that were there. When I got there, it was like almost all Crips.
Right.
You know, it was like, I mean, there were blue rags everywhere. And like you had mentioned, and you know, your videos previously, back in the day, you could wear your bandana,
right,
to signify where you were from or who you associated with.
right.
You know, so we had all these different bandanas. Well, you know, sagging and flagging, I mean, that's where that comes from. You know, the Crips sagging their pants and flagging that blue rag.
Right.
And so, you know, they were walking the line, and they had a few Bloods there. You know, and I mean, there's a couple of them that I'm still in touch with to this day. That, I mean, I give them all the respect in the world, man. You know, if you know, you're thrown into a Shark Tank. You know, I mean, here you are, the rival gang from LA, and you got to do time on a line that's like 90% the rival gang.
Right.
You know, so but eventually, you know, again, it kind of, there came somewhat of a balance, just
Right.
like the northern and southern Mexicans. You know, when I worked PIA, we had guys that were from San Jose. You know,
Right.
that were straight northerners, and then at the same time we had guys from LA that were southerners.
I heard at one point though they would try to bring in northern Mexicans, and the you know, the southerners were just stabbing the crap out of them as soon as they got off the fish row. You know.
Yeah, when it first became a reception center, and you know, this is something else, a little piece of history on Tracy. When I started there, it was a level 3 main line, and you had a lot of lifers there. And because the whole thing about going to Tracy was the vocational education program, and it was designed to give people a trade so that when you got out, you'd have a skill so that you could actually go out in the world and be a welder or a, you know, cabinet maker, or a body and fender guy, or whatever. And so a lot of lifers wanted to be at Tracy so that they could learn these skills, so when they got out, that they could, you know, they could go out and do that in the world. But I don't know when it was, probably about early 90s, Sacramento decided to make Tracy a reception center. And in my opinion, that's when it all went to hell, because now we're receiving guys from Northern California. And not only were we receiving Northern Mexicans, but we were also receiving Northern Mexicans that didn't get along.
Right.
You know, there's down around the Fresno area, there's a certain group that don't get along with another little group, and we were receiving all them guys together, and it was rocking and rolling. I mean, they were banging heads themselves, you know. But you know, some of them, they would make them approved to be on the line at Tracy, and like you said, it was like on site. These poor
Right.
guys were getting thrown to the wolves soon as they threw them on the main line. It's like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
where's all my homies?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a trip.
And Tracy's kind of an older prison, and I went in some cells there, man, that had gouges in the concrete by the toilet, like, foot and a half long and, an inch deep, where guys sharpened knives
Yeah.
in the same spot in the same cell for years. And,
Yeah.
people don't understand. I mean, nowadays they cut guys with razor blades and all that stuff. But, I mean, I imagine as a CEO, and, you worked there quite a long time, you've seen a variety of different types of weapons. So, I mean, like, what was that like? I mean, what type of stuff did you see? Like,
Well, like you said, back in the day, they literally called them bone crushers.